Thanks, Harry. Good morning, everyone. First, I just want to thank Fawkner RSL for putting on the dawn service this morning, and for all of you for coming today, and acknowledge Councillor Alio Funley as well. In the lead up to Anzac Day this year, I've tried to spend a bit of time thinking about or reflecting about the term "lest we forget." It's an idea that, of course, we always remember the sacrifice and service of our armed personnel. And I think in part we remember them because at some level it can be personal. Perhaps a great-grandfather fought and died in World War I, or a grandfather in World War II, or an uncle in Vietnam. For myself, I think of my uncle, Jono, who's in the Australian Army, and he drove Leopard tanks at Puckapunyal, and I think of my grandfather, who was an auxiliary in Montgomery's 8th Army in North Africa, and he used to tell, before he passed away, he used to tell me snatches of stories of his service in World War II as he roamed the Sahara Desert. Now, he reckons he single-handedly, with just his one rifle on his own, took prisoner a whole unit of an Italian artillery. Now, I couldn't tell whether, because I was too young at the time, I couldn't tell whether he was having me on, but he noted that the enemy units, the Italian enemy units that he just caught, just wanted to get out of the hot desert and to the relative comfort of a British POW camp in Cairo, where they were used in the mess. So I wish now I'd asked him more questions about that period, so that I could remember more and remember more about his service now that he's passed away. But the personal connection we have with our forebears' service does not fully explain why so many millions of Australians attend Anzac commemoratives and dawn services around the country. It doesn't explain why you're here this morning on such a rainy and cold morning, as well as all the services in the far-flung lands in which Australian soldiers fought and died, and why this attendance has actually increased over the years, even though the ranks of the veterans have thinned out. The memories of that service of our fathers and our grandfathers and our grandmothers are now kept alive by their descendants and by the millions of Australians that stand in cold mornings such as this in the dawn to remember them. I think that we remember and we never forget, because deep in our hearts, deep down in the marrow of our bones, Australians know that the sacrifice of so many thousands of diggers, in no small measure, is indeed, I think, the essence of why we enjoy the freedoms of our Australian democracy. We owe it to them. Similarly, today, the continued service of our servicemen and women protects our way of life and provides humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to those less fortunate around the world. And our diggers today are deployed in some of the same far-flung places that so many of our Anzacs in the past are buried in, along the rocky hills and deserts of the Middle East. And today, as did their forebears, they defend our nation and our democracy, ensuring we can continue to enjoy our freedoms. And I think that is why we as Australians come out in our millions to commemorate their sacrifice and service. I've been to a lot of Anzac services, dawn services, much like today's, in Melbourne, the Shrine, in Canberra, and I stood in a solemn way, in a respectful way, and at least intellectually I understood the history of that sacrifice. However, it never really hit me emotionally, though, until I attended an Anzac dawn service when I was serving in Iraq, in Baghdad. I spent almost a year in Iraq working for the Australian government in 2003 and 2004, and I never ever forget the dawn service in 2004 at the Australian Forces headquarters at Camp Victory. Every morning at dawn at Camp Victory in the Republican Palace in those areas in Baghdad were hit with mortars and rockets. So the Anzac service had an especially eerie feel that particular morning because of the backdrop. And I remember seeing in the dawn sky the tracer fire that lit up the pre-dawn sky, and the background noise of the helicopter gunships that rumbled across the sky as we commenced the service. And as the sun rose and the last post was played, I saw just a silhouette of the bugler against the blood-orange sky. And it hit me with an emotion which I still can't really describe in words, or adequately at least in words. Because of course I already knew that the diggers all around me at this service were putting their lives at risk every day, often protecting me in the work that I did as we moved across Baghdad and in Fallujah and Ramadi and other parts of Iraq in the Australian light armoured vehicles, the ASLAVs. But the scene, I guess, made me think more deeply, I guess, about the first Anzacs and how so many had died. So many tens of thousands had paid the ultimate sacrifice in service in France, in the Mideast, and of course at Gallipoli. Ordinary men whose deeds made them extraordinary. And that is the point about service in the armed forces. It is so many ways an extraordinary act of sacrifice for others, for the nation. And at that moment at the dawn service in Baghdad, I felt an enormous gratitude that generations of our servicemen and women had fought and died for our freedoms. And yes, I admit I shed a tear at that service, and I don't do that often, though I may do that if my beloved Magpies lose to Essendon today. They're not going very well at the moment. Yet the ANZAC spirit we commemorate is also an uplifting one. The mateship, the camaraderie, the larrikin spirit of the Australian soldier and officer are legendary. And I remember when our own now Governor-General, Sir Peter Cosgrove, was Chief of Defence Force, and I don't think he would mind me telling this story. He used to visit Iraq a fair bit when I was there, and we would travel together to various meetings in the convoys of the ASLAVs. Now, the gunner in my ASLAV, his name was Minto, he used to let me stick my head out and take a look around when we drove through the streets, even though there were snipers about. And on this occasion, as we drove through Baghdad, travelling in the convoy, I looked up and I saw in the ASLAV ahead of me a soldier standing ramrod straight from the waist up outside the vehicle. But it wasn't any soldier, it was General Cosgrove. And of course there was a bit of swearing going on, and Minto called ahead. I told him to call ahead and tell the sergeant in the lav up ahead to tell him to sit down. But of course the sergeant couldn't tell General Cosgrove to sit down. He was sending a deliberate message to the diggers that he was with them, and he's one of them. And today we are with the diggers in spirit and in memory and in remembrance. The RSL sub-branches like Fawkner around our great country have been with the diggers for 100 years. And when the wars are over, it's the RSL sub-branches that look after the survivors, the veterans, the widows, the orphans. And they epitomise the great Australian quality of mateship. And we as Australians, I know, will always remember them, our dads, our mums, our uncles, our aunts, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our mates, our servicemen and women, those that gave their lives and those that gave us so much to live for today. And we will always remember them. And we remember too the anniversaries that are a very important part of the passing years, and they're marked in this particular ANZAC Day. The 100-year anniversary of Polygon Wood in Belgium in World War I, the 100-year anniversary of the Battle of Passchendaele, the Third Battle of Ypres in France. The two battles of Passchendaele were part of a series of battles that were part of what is generally known as the Third Battle of Ypres, where our Kiwi brothers suffered what has been described as the worst day in New Zealand history. There were 13,000 Allied casualties, including 2,735 New Zealanders, 845 of whom had been killed or lay wounded and stranded in the mud of no man's land. In lives lost in a day, this was the worst day in New Zealand history, and we should think of our brothers and sisters across the pond. The 99-year anniversary since Villers-Bretonneux, an Australian effort so special that Sir John Monash described it at the time as the finest thing done in the war by any soldiers of any army. The 75th anniversary of the Darwin bombings, the 75th anniversary of the Bangor Island massacre of Australian nurses, the 75th anniversary of the fall of Singapore. These are all marked this year. While many of these people, and all of these people who were there, are no longer with us, we remember the sacrifice and we remember their struggle today, because all we have left of them in some respects are the sepia-stained photos and the grainy footage, often black and white grainy footage. But they are enough of reminders for us, for our memories to remain strong in commemoration. The old images are signposts to the stories of sacrifice and struggle that they went through, and the importance of those events in the pages of history. And remember too that we don't celebrate victory on ANZAC Day, we commemorate their service. We actually commemorate a defeat, because it's about their service and their struggle. And whether they were our great-grandparents, our grandparents, or other distant family members, all of us as Australians, one family, recall the sacrifices made for the broader Australian family, for our community and for our nation. And that's why we commemorate each ANZAC Day these brave and selfless people who have fought for us, and way too many who have made the ultimate sacrifice, lest we forget.
Now I'd like to call on the St Mark's Choir to sing the National Anthem. Thank you. Special thanks for today certainly go to the member for Wills, Peter Khalil, Councillor, I've lost his name, there it is there, Ali Irfani, the St Mark's Choir, thank you very much for your efforts. The Bugler, Michael Kane, thank you very much. And for the many members and helpers who have been working tirelessly behind the scenes in appalling conditions this morning, I might add. You know, it's bad for all of us, but they've been doing it particularly tough. I'd like to thank them as well. Special thanks to Alan Henderson. I know he does a hell of a lot of work around the place, which we can't see him do, but he does a terrific job. I'd like to now close the service with saying that, okay, there are eats available, not a big eat because we haven't got our kitchen in full flight at the moment. We hope that'll be up and running in about a fortnight, and we'd like as many people as we could to come down and frequent that. Thank you very much for your attendance.